All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and what a lovely tribute to a trailblazer. I am, as Sherry introduced, a transition coordinator. I also have siblings who are connected with OPWDD, so I have sort of lived through this on a personal and a professional level. While things were really, really different, I won't give away my age, but really different when my siblings graduated. There were pathways, these pathways did not exist at the time, but we will go ahead and talk about this ever-changing process of exiting high school for students with disabilities. In the chat, the first box that you will see is our presentation, and the second box is a Jamboard. For those of you who have never tried Jamboard, if you do not want to be recorded or on camera or even have your name, you can opt out of doing the jam. But if you are interested in checking that out, go ahead and click on it. You can kind of introduce yourself. We can gauge an idea of where people are coming from and what your interests are. John, do you want to take a moment? I'm going to pull up my jam while I share the screen and introduce yourself.
Certainly. So my name is John Clausson. I'm the transition specialist here at Wildwood School, in addition to the coordinator for the young adult program. So the vast majority, almost 100% of the students that come to Wildwood receive the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential and access FAPE until they're 21. So I hope that I can give you kind of a unique perspective for a school that might look a little bit different than many of the people here on this call. My great uncle, he was great because he was a great person, but also he was actually my mother's uncle, was born with a significant disability and actually spent some time in Letchworth. So that was the types of services that people received back in those days. So I have been intimately involved in working with people with disabilities my entire life. And now I actually have a son who has an IEP who's in school. So I am in it for the long haul. So I look forward to looking at the Jamboard and getting to know all of you and where you're at. So thank you for the opportunity.
If you've never done a Jamboard before, because I just sort of tossed it at you, if you can see on my screen, clicking right here is a sticky note, and that's probably the easiest way to add information. And at the top, you will see one of 7. So if you want to add to the other jams, I'm going to switch the page for a minute. How comfortable are you with your knowledge of exiting credentials? We just kind of want to gauge. You can click on one of the shapes and drag it to the area that you are feeling today. And we can get an idea of whether we have a room full of experts and can kind of have more of a discussion, or if we need to run the show here. Again, there's a third page that says draw a check mark. You can kind of just have fun here while you listen. Draw a check mark under the post-it with which you're most comfortable. So maybe I'm going to put a little check mark under the CDOS. Draw a question mark under the one you are most unsure about, and draw a heart under the one that is nearest and dearest to yours. So I'll let this run in the background and we'll go back and kind of peek in. It's nice to see that we do have parents and educators and advocates. It's wonderful to have kind of a mixture of everyone. And we have people kind of far and wide. I don't even know that I've heard of some. I don't know where Weebituk is, but welcome, Darlene. We'll click on over to our presentation now, and we're going to start with, we'll skip through here. We're going to start by discussing the 4 pathways in general. There are 4 I say pathways, that was a mistake. There are not 4 pathways. There are actually really 2. The Regents Diploma or the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential. You may also end up with a local diploma or a CDOS. But in actuality, all students will either start out aiming for a Regents Diploma or aiming for a Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential. New York State has done a beautiful job recently, actually, of kind of providing more accessible explanations to family members, to educators on their websites. And a lot of times you'll see, something at the bottom of my screen that's usually clickable. So if you clicked on diploma credential requirements as of August 2021, you will get the most updated information about those requirements. And they do change almost yearly, especially with our changes from COVID, where a lot of the exemptions occurred. You can figure out that an exemption, if you have a Regents exempt, if your student received a Regents credit through the exemption, that's considered a 65. So it's a Regents diploma with a pass of 65 or higher. It can be used just like any other Regents exam with pretty much no exceptions. There's some question about how we would go about using that for the superintendent's determination, but we can get to that later. There was also at the bottom of that page, I don't know that you noticed, but there's a tracking tool that New York State has created for parents. It's not super user-friendly for individuals with disabilities because it really is all about the Regents diploma, but it does give you some idea for credits and things like that. And most of you are already in the Jamboard, so we'll skip through that. Thank you for adding your information, by the way. I will start with the Regents diploma. So as I said, unless in ninth grade or prior to ninth grade, it was determined that you will receive the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential, which John will talk about in a little bit, every single student starts out and their pathway is to get a Regents. In many of our cases, this seems like asking a student to climb Mount Fiji, right? This is remarkable that we expect every student to sit for all these Regents exams and for this to be their exiting credential. But let's dive into it a little bit. So it's become a little more accessible in that we now have a 4+1 pathway to a Regents diploma. All students that receive a Regents diploma will get 22-ish credits, and there are district requirements, for instance, at Schalmont, in addition to the credits that you must obtain, which includes specific numbers in certain classes, a certain number of PE credits, a health credit. Our district also requires students to complete careers in financial management. Other districts may have something different, but there are some, it does vary slightly based on your district. They also include things like those credits also include electives. So it might be chef's class, for instance, here at Schalmont will get you credits towards your Regents diploma. So in addition to the core areas, you have the electives and you have any district requirements. There's a Regents exam that's required in 4 core areas. So that means English, math, science, and a social studies, plus one more. That could be one more Regents exam or plus a pathway. So districts kind of have a say to some extent over what the pathway looks like. So if you have an arts pathway, that might mean that a student will be taking 4 different art classes and have to pass a specific test that is, sort of culminates in I'm sorry, every once in a while my light goes out here. I'll do the YMCA periodically. That's great. I guess it's not coming back on. So you'll have an assessment at the end of each one of these pathways in some way, shape, or form. In arts, you'll have an art, or it might be music or performing arts. Arts kind of is all encompassing. World Languages has an assessment that culminates, your studies culminate in an assessment much like a Regents exam. The CTE program, so if you have students that are going to VOTEC, their CTE programs serve as a pathway. So it's those 4 Regents exams plus their CTE certificate that they would receive at VOTEC. The CDOS, which is the Career Development and Occupational Studies Commencement Credential, also serves as a pathway. And there's the employability profile, a career plan, and so on that we'll go into a bit more, that would serve sort of as their cornerstone. And humanities is more of additional English slash social studies, maybe sociology. Again, it's district dependent. And then there's the STEM pathway. So it's the 4 core plus this additional one, and in hopes that we can kind of capitalize on a student's passion. So if a student is passionate about carpentry, then they can go that CTE route. If a student is passionate about Spanish, they can do world languages. And students can earn a Regents diploma with a maximum of 1 appealed score. That's for all students. All students can appeal a Regents score. If you are not identified as a student with a disability, then it has to be a score of a 60 to 64. If you're an English language learner, you can appeal a score of 55 to 59. And if you're a student with a disability, you can appeal a score that's 52 to 54. And we'll talk a little bit more about the additional supports and safety nets that are in place for students with disabilities. Do we have any questions about Regents exam or the Regents diploma before we move on? I promise to get to more of that, the exceptions to the rules. I see a chat. Let me just make sure that it's not a question. Okay. So the appeals, like I said, you can have 1 for a Regents diploma and 2 for a local diploma. So if you're a student with a disability, you can appeal 2 of your exams. So that means, as I mentioned before, I'm having trouble with my little, there we go. As I mentioned before, a student with a disability can appeal a score of a 52 to a 54. So they must have, if you are appealing one of your Regents exam scores, you must have taken the test at least 2 times. You must have taken advantage of academic help specific to that exam once you have not been successful. You must have passed the course. And for students with disabilities, this means pass the course with all of the modifications and accommodations that you are entitled to have. And you must be recommended for exemption of that exam or of that pass score by a teacher or a department head. I know this is dry material, guys, so have fun with that jam while you're listening. Local diplomas and safety nets. So students with an IEP can earn a local diploma with a maximum of the 2 appealed scores. There's a low pass of 55 to 64. So if a student with a disability receives a 55 to 64, they do not need to appeal. It is not the same as students that are not identified. The low pass with the appeal, again, you can appeal up to 2 Regents exams. This is why that score is lower. This is why it's below 55 that you can appeal for. The compensatory safety net is another option. So if you have, this is really only for social studies and science, but if you can compensate a score of a 65 or higher with one of a 45 or 54. So say you have a 65, or in the case of an individual with a disability, say you have a 64 on an ELA Regents exam, and you get a 45 on the science exam. That 64 on the English exam can compensate for that 45 on the science exam. So that's considered a pass. So while we said, my oh my, this Regents diploma looks like climbing Mount Everest, there are lots and lots of ways in which we can work to get these scores at the level of acceptance for a Regents diploma, or a local diploma rather. So students that are eligible, this is the students that have an IEP 504 or have been declassified after 8th grade, and it's noted on their plan. So if you're a 504-hour declassified student, it needs to be noted on your plan that you can use the low pass, that you can use the compensatory safety net. For students with an IEP, are automatically eligible. Any questions there? Feel free to unmute too. You don't have to put it in the chat. Now, one of the pathways that we discussed was the CDOS. The CDOS is a certificate. It is not a diploma, and it can never be a standalone pathway to graduation. So if you look at a person's IEP, at the top-ish area of your IEP, it'll say what your diploma pathway is. That can never say CDOS. In reality, it should either say Regents or SACC, because those are the two true pathways. The students may ultimately end up with a local diploma, or may ultimately end up with just the CDOS, but the path that they're aiming for is a Regents or a SACC. If you leave with only the CDOS, you cannot use that to apply to college, the military, or trade schools. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But it can be used as a pathway to a Regents or a local diploma. So again, you need to earn 22 credits towards a diploma if you are receiving the CDOS. If as part of your pathway, sorry, I need a little water. If it turns out that you're receiving your CDOS, if you've tried and tried and tried, and you are not successful at a Regents or getting the scores needed for a local diploma, you've tried and tried, and you even are probably not going to be able to get a superintendent's determination, which we will talk about in a bit. The credits of the 22 credits toward a diploma is also not a requirement if you are leaving with only your CDOS. The same requirement as a SACC of 12 years after kindergarten is the requirement for leaving with just the CDOS. What you do need to do is develop a career plan. And generally that career plan should start at the age of transition and be updated every single year. You also need a successful completion of 216 hours of CTE coursework, so career and tech ed coursework, or work-based learning experience. So you can have 216 hours of hands-on work-based learning experience, and that can count in lieu of coursework, or you can have a combination thereof. But you must have a minimum of 54 hours of work-based learning experience. So it's a matter of just kind of playing with those numbers. We use our career and financial management course as one of the courses for that. Students also can do things like a chef's class or some of their VOTEC coursework. If students go to VOTEC, they often will receive work-based learning hours, but please don't assume that they are. When you receive their report card, it's usually printed right on there how many hours they receive, and it completely varies based on program and year. And the students also have to have at least one employability profile completed. At Schalmont, we do an employability profile for every single placement that a student participates in. And I think that's probably common practice, but at the very least that they have to have an employability profile that's completed during the school year that the certificate is awarded.
Molly, not to interject, there seems to be some audio issues where you sound far away. I don't know if it's in relation to where your speaker is, or if you have headphones that you could put in.
Is everybody experiencing that with me?
Yeah, it just got better. So I'm not sure what you did, but yeah, people were saying.
All right, I have to apparently, you're going to get a really good close-up of me because I apparently have to sit on top of my computer.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So, in addition to the career plan and the employability profile and the 12 years beyond kindergarten or 22 credits towards a diploma, the minimum of 54 hours of work-based learning experience and up to 216 of coursework and or work-based learning experience, students need to demonstrate achievement of the commencement level of the CDOS learning standards. If you have not read the CDOS learning standards, I encourage you that every time you see a green underline here, you can click on it and it will give you New York State's sample career plan. Not my favorite, but it's there for you. The employability profile I actually think is pretty good. So that's there as well. And there's a link to the CDOS learning standards. I'm going to try to click on it and pull it up. Sometimes if I get too many things going, it interferes. So if that happens, oh, look, it's done quickly. So the commencement level of CDOS learning standards is pretty significant. And technically, you need to be at commencement level in order to receive your CDOS. So that means that you are work ready. You are ready to go. The idea is that if you have your CDOS, you are ready for an entry-level position. So, see if I can move this bar around. I have the Zoom bar is covering my ability to scroll. Okay. So if you are scrolling through the CDOS learning standards, you can see that there are 3 sections. This is 3B and this is career major. So this is where you specialize. I'm going to go back to the top so you can get an idea here. Is anybody not familiar with the CDOS learning standards? You can use, oh, I see somebody waving. I'm just going to show you right up. If you look at your toolbar, one of the options, mine's not there, of course. One of the options is a reaction, and you can raise your hand, you can give a smiley face, you can give all kinds of lovely things to me. So feel free to use the reaction button as well on your Zoom toolbar. You can use that to ask a question if you want to, instead of posting as well. So you can see there's standard 1, which is the career development. So students just learn about career options in the world under career development. Standard 2 is how do you apply the things that you do at school to the world of work. Standard 3 is really about foundations in workplace. So this is kind of more of the soft skills area. And 3B is focusing on your career of choice, which of course, everybody knows when they're 16 and working on it. But we do try to focus, if we have students that know what they're doing, we do try to really focus in on that as well. So if I go to the second page and we do see career development, you can see that it's broken into elementary, intermediate, and then if I scroll down a bit, commencement level. Now that's because CDOS learning standards are one of New York State's learning standards, and they are for all K to 12. So your kindergarten teachers should be using these CDOS learning standards as frequently as your 12th and beyond. So if we take a look at this first one, for example, career development, students will learn about the changing nature of the workplace, the value of work to society, and the connection of work to the achievement of personal goals. That's the elementary level. And it gives some examples. It says they'll begin a career plan in elementary school, right? That's something that they can do. So I might want to grow up to be maybe I want to grow up to be Santa Claus. So I might need to know that I'm going to be in charge of a whole lot of people and need to know a little bit about manufacturing and transportation and things like that. But as we move on, we're really going to focus in on what that might mean for their particular work preferences. So students will learn about the changing nature of the workplace. This is the commencement level. The value of work to society, not much different than the elementary level, and the connection of work to the achievement of personal goals. So again, there might be a career plan, but if we look underneath, it says this is evident, for example, when a student reevaluates a long-range personal goal and matches it to a career option. So instead of becoming Santa, they may want to become a CEO. So I'm still in charge of a whole lot of people, and I still might need to know about manufacturing. I might need to know about managing staff, but here's my goal now, and it's more realistic, and I can match it to career options. There are things like prepare a personal balance sheet showing an inventory of acquired skills, prepare a research paper that details specific jobs, develop resumes, letters of applications, and so on. Sometimes we use portfolios with our students. So while this all may seem to some kind of out of reach, remember this also is with modifications and accommodations. We don't just expect this to be done independently, because oftentimes if this is a student who's leaving with just a CDOS, that's a student who will be getting supports after school, will maybe be in supported employment, will maybe be in a without walls program, something like that. Questions?
I've got 3 or 4 questions from the chat, so I will read the first one. It says, what are problems most of the students say is the reason for an exam score less than 85?
What are the reasons for an exam score less than 85?
Yeah, what do students say is the reason for getting an exam score less than 85, I believe is the question. And there may not be an answer for it, but if you have one.
I think that's completely student dependent. So it depends on it depends on the area of the exam. It depends on a student's needs as far as supports. It depends on the accessibility of the content. So I just, for instance, one of my other hats is I'm a speech language pathologist and I push into global studies. And the vocabulary in global studies alone is so difficult that it takes a great deal of time to break it down, to digest it, to relate it to other vocabulary. And that's really, it's funny because when we all went to school, or at least when I went to school, if I took an exam in social studies, I needed to know, dates, and I needed to know places, and I needed to know important people. But today, our global studies exam has you really critically thinking about what that point in time means for the content that's being presented. So if I'm talking about industrialization in Great Britain, how did that relate to maybe the French Revolution, or how did that relate to the American Revolution, and so on and so forth. So it's really about connections. It's really difficult, which is why it's so important that the IEPs have very specific modifications and accommodations that will best support a student to become successful. And while an 85 may be something that we want because it might be able to, then we can kind of let that off of our shoulders. An 85 is not needed to pass. I know that I'm not going to go into honors, and I'm not going to go into advanced designations in Regents diplomas. There are links on here so that you can read a bit more about that, because I think I want to cover the options that are more accessible for most of my students with disabilities. By no means does that mean that students with disabilities can't get a Regents with advanced designation, or can't get a Regents with honors. It's just that that's not going to cover the most of our audience, so I'm not going to focus on that, but there are links in here for you to do that.
Awesome. Another question. Who determines the student has achieved the CDOS standards?
So usually there is a teacher that's assigned to, so in my program, I think it varies. I oversee the work-based learning program here, but it is not up to me to teach the CDOS skills. Those CDOS skills are being taught in every single class. So in our 11th grade English class, they do a research paper on the career of their choice. In career and financial management, they do budgeting. They do some soft skills and some prep for interviewing, researching careers, salaries, making budgets, things like that. Those are all in the CDOS standards. So the CDOS standards are being done across the board. I sit down with the teacher of the students that primarily go out to the work-based learning sites in our district, and we go through the standards, and there's actually, if you go to this link that says CDOS, there's a link at the end of the presentation on the CDOS, and on that New York State's webpage, there is a checklist for did they meet these different commencement level, the commencement level of each of the standards there, and there's a checkbox. So you can kind of you don't have to break down the skills yourself. They've already done it for you, and you can say yes or no. And in general, with modifications and accommodations, most of our students have never had an issue. We have had to go back and really specifically teach some skills, but generally speaking, they get through it if they get through 12 plus years. Was there a third question?
Yes, so I will close with this question. It says, I'm wondering if this presentation is relevant for a child after high school, a child who is at an alternative the child was alternatively assessed and private special education had an IEP.
Yes, so we're, in the beginning I showed the 4 different pathways. We will talk about the skills and achievement commencement credential, which is often the commencement credential or the exiting credential that a student who is not in a typical school, who might be in a more specialized school, will likely get. And John will also talk about sort of what happens after you turn 21, how to get the supports that you need. He and I will both touch base on that, and what happens when high school is done. So moving on, the last portion that I want to cover before I turn it over to John is the superintendent's determination. So this is for students with a current IEP. This is not for anybody with a 504, and this is not for anyone who has who no longer has their IEP. So it is initiated. The only way that you can have a superintendent's determination is if it is initiated in writing from a guardian. So this is if a student does not meet the low pass or compensatory options on the diploma or on the Regents exams. They have earned and passed the graduation credits, including the Regents classes with modifications and accommodations, but they did not pass the Regents exam in ELA or math. They can use the CDOS to compensate for that ELA or math, and we can then present to the superintendent all of the evidence that they have passed the classes, that they have achieved the requirements of the classes, despite the fact that they may not have been able to pass that test. Again, that's got to be initiated through a guardian. I'm going to have John take over to talk a little bit about the skills and achievement commencement credential, and then we'll pop back and forth.
Thanks, Molly. I need you to kind of be my hands and my eyes if there's any questions or something, because my screen is just your PowerPoint and your picture. So
okay, what do you want to share so that you can kind of flip through, or do you want me to kind of be your pointer as well?
be my pointer. That's fine.
Okay. I can't see the chat. For whatever reason, the chat is not refreshing for me, so I can't do the questions, but go ahead.
Okay. So as Molly was saying, so really the second pathway, if you will, for graduation is the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential, also known as the SACC. It's a graduation credential that documents a student's ability or level of independence across a couple of different areas, including academics, career development, and foundation skills. Kind of that CDOS learning standard that Molly showed earlier in the presentation. Instead of an expectation of a mastery or an achievement of those areas, what the SACC does is it shows you what level of independence are you at each of those skills. And we'll go through the exit credential or the exit documentation where it actually shows it has a range or a scale of independence for each of those skills, and it just shows where you fall along those. This credential is designed for people with significant disabilities and those who are alternately assessed. A student with a significant disability refers to a student who has significant limited cognitive abilities combined with behavioral and or physical limitations that require highly specialized education. So as I said earlier in the presentation, almost 100% of the students here at Wildwood School graduate with this credential. And it said that roughly 1% of the students with disabilities in New York State will graduate with it. So you can see our education here is highly specialized for those who require that level of support. This takes place for those who have been in the field for a while, this takes place of the IEP diploma. Really, the IEP diploma was nothing more than just a refreshed IEP. What the SACC does is it really shows, again, the level of independence somebody is functioning across the CDOS learning standard. All right, Molly, if you want to go to next. So what is alternate assessment? So the New York State Ultimate Assessment is designed for general education assessments, cannot be accessed even with all the accommodations listed on a student's IEP. So each year for grades 3 through 8, You get an ELA math and science assessment, and then you would get one at the secondary level. Here at Wildwood, that's usually around 17. In a typical school, it would probably be, correct me if I'm wrong, but 10th grade, 11th grade? You're muted, Molly.
I'm sorry, one more time?
The secondary assessment, that would be 10th grade or 11th grade?
We usually give that, yes, around 10th or 11th, but then again, when they are exiting.
So it's an online assessment tool that you can receive accommodations for. The assessment tool is called the Dynamic Learning Maps. And what you do is the first contact survey will kind of ask questions about the students, take into account the accommodations that are on the IEP, and then you're able to implement those accommodations for the alternate assessment. So I have an example here. If a student is blind, you would be able to get the assessment in Braille if needed. If you can go to the next one. So as with the CDOS, it can be awarded anytime after 12 years of students or 12 years of study, except not including kindergarten. As I already said, it's the only exiting credential that does not expect a mastery of the learning standards. So the other pathway, singular, has all these exemptions and supports and ways that we're able to achieve that mastery of that learning standard. The SACC is the only one that does not require that mastery level. And the credential must also be accompanied by a summary of the student's academic achievement functioning, or also known as the exit summary. This is a really important tool, something that I think New York State has done a really nice job in. It really gives a clear picture of where that student is functioning or their level of independence against the CDOS as they go into post-secondary success, whatever that might be for them.
All of our students receive an exit summary, regardless of whether they receive the SACC or a Readiness diploma. And one of the things that is so important about that exit summary, at least
Molly, could you come closer to the mic? I'm sorry.
At least for our district, we put all of the contact information for the agencies that they're connected to after high school. So there's a lot of great information on there. I think it's invaluable to have that as sort of a takeaway.
I agree. And actually on the next slide, so if you click on the exit summary form, I actually have a link to a blank copy of that. And of course, this is from the state ed site. So as you go through it, it just breaks down that CDOS learning standard that Molly showed earlier in the presentation. And then as you go down, it starts to ask for their level of independence. And you could see the comment or the column right there, and it would be a scale of 1 through 5. And then that comment section, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. We use this as a tool a lot of the times of what coping strategy the student uses in order to be successful, or that level of independence. We'll also use that comment section to say maybe some things to avoid when trying to work on that skill. A lot of our students, this is a great transitional tool for when they go into a day hab or a day hab without walls setting. It really gives a clear picture of what works, what doesn't work, and where that student is functioning against this backdrop of work and what work might mean for them. Molly, if you go all the way down to the bottom, this is that area where we could put all of those different contact numbers, your care coordinator, the day program that might be going to, maybe the guidance counselor at the school. That's been really helpful, but all that contact information. So it's an in-depth, it's a pretty cumbersome documentation, but it's really, really helpful and been very successful for our students.
Is it all right if I jump in with a couple questions from the chat?
Absolutely.
One of the questions is, what is a SACC and what are the requirements for this type of diploma?
SACC, so that's the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential. That's the other pathway. So when a student with a significant disability is not able to acquire a Regents or a local diploma or even a CDOS, and they are alternately assessed, the exiting credential they receive is the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential, also known as the SACC.
Awesome. And then the next question, the last question is, comparing a SACC to the CDOS, is there a better credential? Recognize that CDOS students normally working towards Regents. However, state ed website clearly states any student not alternatively assessed can pursue CDOS. A Regents is not a requirement to earn a CDOS. Does one credential provide something the other does not?
It's funny because I think John and I might differ on this. I feel like the SACC is something that is individualized, and it's a pathway that you can work toward from the beginning, whereas the CDOS is not a pathway that you can work toward. You, in both the SACC and the CDOS, you are working on your career development and occupational studies learning standards. The CDOS does seem to indicate, is supposed to indicate that you're ready for entry-level employment, whereas the SACC doesn't necessarily indicate that. It doesn't not indicate that, but I'll let John talk a bit more about that. Neither of them can be used to apply for college, the military, or a trade school. You must have a diploma to apply for college, military, or trade school, or get an equivalent. But these are both certificates and cannot be used for that.
And I think that, when New York State got away from the IEP diploma, I think that that was really helpful because the IEP diploma wasn't in fact a diploma. And, so there was some of these limitations around an IEP diploma. What this does is it really, it separates, a diploma from a credential. So the CDOS and the SACC are the only two credentials. And as Molly said, you can't use that to get into a school or a trade school. But the SACC definitely, I do agree with Molly that it definitely individualizes the student's experience a lot more. And those students that have graduated here with a CDOS, I feel like the SACC has done a better job of explaining where they are functioning once they leave. I don't know if I fully understand the question that was asked and if I'm answering it. And I can't see who asked it. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does a good job answering the question. I'll ask you, just because I don't want to pull too much time away from the presentation, but now questions are starting to come in. I'll ask two more. This one says, I didn't know about the career assessment until last year. My daughter's teacher never provided anything to me last year. Who do I ask in the district about this and get a copy of what the outcome was? Example, if she wanted to be Santa Claus.
I'm assuming that you mean the career plan.
Yes,
So,
that's what it sounds like.
okay. So usually the career plan is the guidance office would have the career plan, or the career plan would be housed with whichever program. So we have our career plans are electronic. Some of them are paper copies. Every district is a little bit different, but certainly I would start with guidance and or if your daughter was in a self-contained program, maybe that teacher has that career plan, but there certainly would be a copy of it if they were awarded the Career Development and Occupational Studies Commencement Credential. Not every district does a career plan every single year, but there certainly should be one if the credential was awarded.
Awesome, thank you. And then the last question I'll ask for right now is, who is responsible for filling out the exit documentation? Is it the school district, CM, private special ed administration, school administrator, etc.?
So it is the school district's responsibility. Here at Wildwood, it is a collaborative effort. So social work, speech pathologist, teacher, they all work collaboratively to fill it out. And we actually collect data throughout the student's experience here at Wildwood when they're within their work-based learning experience, so that we could fill that document out with fidelity. But I think that it's different in all different school districts, but ultimately it is the school district's responsibility to fill out that exit summary.
Thank you all so much.
And I think it goes, it's worth saying, especially for our families that are out there listening to this. There is some confusion around the CDOS the CDOS credential and the SACC, because the CDOS is it's one of the learning standards that New York State has set forth, and it really has to do with the world of work, and that's the learning standard that Molly showed us. The SACC is still looking at that CDOS learning standard. It's just there's not the expectation of mastery. So I think that there's some confusion when we talk about those two different credentials. We're still we're working within the same framework of the CDOS learning standard. It's just that a CDOS credential expects a mastery of it, where the SACC is showing our level of independence, or where we're functioning along those skills. So if that distinction is not clear, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. But I know that that's something that a lot of families kind of get caught up in, and then us educators kind of take for granted, because we talk this mumbo jumbo all the time. So if that's not clear, please.
No, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, so the CDOS, you have to have the commencement level achievement, whereas the SACC, you do not for that standard.
All right, Molly.
This is me. So I'm adding this in here because I am often, as the transition coordinator, faced with parents and students who are really struggling with what their idea of graduation looks like, because we certainly in our culture have a very clear picture of what graduation is, don't we? And it doesn't always fit what happens with our students with disabilities. So every district is different, but if you are a student with a disability and you receive your local or region's diploma, you are no longer entitled to come back to school until you are 21, because you have achieved what your goal for school was. If you receive your commencement credential, whether that be the SACC or the CDOS, without a local or region's diploma, you are entitled to come back to school until you are 21. For many of my students, we do give them their CDOS or their SACC, and then they return. Some districts hold on to that credential until they are ready to leave. So some students may not receive that until they're 21. But because graduation is such a transition point and such a turning stone, it is an expected event, we want them to cross that stage and receive their credential if they have met the requirements and are at the commencement level at the time of their 12th year with their cohort that they started kindergarten with. That being said, I'm sorry about my voice. I was really hoping I would make it through this whole thing. I've been battling for like a week now. That being said, the idea of coming back to school as an adult student, which is what we call it at Schalmont, as an adult student, really needs to look like something other than, hey, I'm coming back to school and doing what I did last year and the year before that and the year before that. Because transition, there's this idea of transition theory by Nancy Schlossberg, and they use it a lot at the college level. And they talk about how transition happens when an event happens, but it also happens when a non-event happens. So if you are not leaving high school after your 12 years, that's a massive transition for you as well. And not only can that be a difficult transition for students, but it's a difficult transition for families. And it is our job to make sure that at our CSE meetings, at our team meetings, in our everyday interactions, and in our planning of what adult education until you're 21 looks like, we need to be cognizant that a non-event causes a transition just as much as an event does. So when Nancy Schlossberg talks about this transition theory, she says you really need to address there are four areas that influence how people cope with transitions, whether it's an event or a non-event. And that's the situation. So what is in their control? What do they have? What choices do you have? So this might mean when you return in your 20th year of life to school that you've been going to forever and sometimes have been with the same group forever and ever, what do you have that's in your control? How can you control the situation? Does the family want the student to receive their credential then? Does the family want to hold at their senior year? Or does the family want to hold off? Does the student want to hold off? Is there something about waiting for that credential? Or do we want to walk across the stage in our 12th year of school and receive the credential and come back and then have choice? So choice is to, what placements I'm going to work-based learning, what classrooms I'm going to take, what additional things I can do in the district that may not be something that's available to other students that are not there as adult students. So I want people to, I'm just putting this out there because this is my own kind of personal, it's kind of what I like to focus on for my kids when they get to their senior year is how am I going to represent, how can I recognize them as an adult? And I even when I sit down for transition meetings, I don't, if I see them for speech, I don't do this, but if I see students just for transition purposes, I say, you're an adult and I'm an adult and you don't have to call me Miss Brown anymore. So even if it's something as simple as that, it also might be, when you talk about self, how do they view themselves and where do they see themselves? And are they feeling confident in their ability to meet the goals that they have for themselves in becoming a young adult? We talk a lot about learning and earning and how do we make the shift from learning to earning. And, we want to build lifelong learners, but we really want people to become productive members of their community. And how can you help them build their idea of self as a productive member of the community and ready for adulthood? So that might mean what supports are in place for them, which we'll get a chance to talk about in a minute, but also what strategies, what stress reduction strategies, what maybe if it's a student that needs an assistive device, what supports do they need in the community to use that? And so on. Any questions about transition theory? I'm just waving my flag because I hope that when people write the transition portion of an IEP, particularly for an adult student, that they think about transition theory and they think about this non-event that really weighs on families a lot.
There are no questions in the chat about transition theory, but we do have one about CDOS that I think could quickly be answered. It says,
sure.
Could the CDOS assist with employability postings?
That actually, oh my goodness, the CDOS started out really with very little weight. And I think now that it is a pathway to a Regents diploma, it's getting a little more teeth. But the CDOS is really what your district makes it. And I think that in building the CDOS, because you have that career plan, because you have an employability profile completed on you. When a student completes an employability profile, not a student, when an employer or when a supervisor or a job coach completes an employability profile on a student, they're rating a student on how employable they are. It's things like attendance and communication, problem solving, really functional skills. Those skills then translate into things like resumes and things you would put in a cover letter. Your work-based learning that you have achieved as a CDOS, which can be up to 216 hours of documented, that's the minimum requirements. We have students leaving with hundreds and hundreds of hours of work-based learning experience. That's all resume building. So while the certificate in and of itself, you can present it to an employer and they may or may not take much stock in it, what built that certificate for that student, what that student achieved by getting that certificate will make them employable. Does that make sense?
I think that was a great answer. Thank you.
Sure. Transition, I put this on here because New York State requires this, and I just want to make sure that everyone is aware. New York State requires that to ensure that parents and families and students are aware of what their graduation options are, there has to be a discussion about graduation requirements that apply to that particular student, their progress toward a diploma, including the number of courses and courses passed, credits earned, what's left, where they're having any difficulties and what's going to be done about that, the exams required for graduation, and it's our job during our CSE meetings and so during transition planning to talk about the appeals process, the safety net options, and the superintendent's determination. Again, that superintendent's determination can't be initiated by anyone other than a guardian. So it says from New York State, directly from at the bottom, there's a link to it, information on superintendent's determination options from New York State. It says at the CSE meeting in which transition services will be discussed, which at minimum is every year from 15 on, the parents must be given written information explaining the graduation requirements, and it goes on from there. All right, I'm going to let John take over.
Just to add to that transition planning, Molly, that transition really should not be looked at, the January before graduation. By law, it should be there. Indicator 13 says it has to be there by 15, if not earlier, if deemed appropriate. So we should really take advantage of that and really have a plan for post-secondary success, because it is a process, and it's a process that's ever changing. So I think one of the biggest things that I could give to families is to stay informed, stay on top of, trainings like this, trends that are happening in state ed, what's happening with, the world of work, or OPWDD, which we're going to talk about a little bit here, because things are changing very rapidly. And sometimes, some providers are better at telling you those changes than others. So what happens when FAPE, or free and appropriate public education, runs out? So Molly was talking about some of those adult students that are coming back to school here at Wildwood. The vast majority of our students stay to 21. And, according to New York State law, you're eligible for FAPE until the year that you turn 21. And if you have a summer birthday, then you're even eligible for that 6-week ESY programming. But regardless of your pathway to graduation, we all have one thing in common, and that's the transition. So I think that for everybody, especially the families on this meeting, you have to have a firm understanding of the difference between entitlement and eligibility. There is, as we talked about earlier, about Ruth in this meeting, there has been a long battle for entitlements of people with disabilities and what is needed for them to be the most successful in school. That, I don't want to say ends, but has more barriers when you go into the world of OPWDD or supports and services after FAPE runs out, because all services through OPWDD, Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, is through eligibility. You have to apply for DayHab, you have to apply for ComHab, you have to apply for the different supports and services that are needed. And they're no longer an entitlement service, it's an eligibility service. So I always encourage families to use what is entitled to you at school so that you could be the most independent in the least restrictive setting possible for post-secondary success, so that you can kind of get a head start on what's out there after graduation. And there's a spectrum of supports for post-secondary success. I know, Molly, you're going to talk about Access VR, but then I'll jump into some of the OPW services that are out there to help continue support students as they move along this journey of life.
While there's a pause, I'll sneak in a question. Someone asked Is it required that a student working on the CDOS sit for Regents even if they are not ready for the Regents?
Well, okay, that's an interesting question. So, not ready for the Regents. So, if a student completes, there's a big spectrum of students who end up with a CDOS. If a student, every student that is going for a Regents diploma, so let me put it a different way. Every student that is not getting their SACC is required to have access to Regents level courses. That means that they will be taking things like, or something that at least is in the realm of global studies, is in the realm of living environment, certainly with modifications and accommodations as needed. That student might require more time, which is why we have 21 years. The 21 years really and truly was designed because you can take 21 years to get your Regents diploma. It was not designed to get you your CDOS and to come back and get work experience initially. It was designed so that you could take 21 years to get a Regents or local diploma. So if you're not ready after year one of living environment, for instance, and you need to take year two of living environment, or you take it and you tank it, the school is required to provide you with supports specific to that test, especially if you've passed that class and then did not do well on the exam. You have to take it at least 2 times in order to then use that as part of your superintendent's determination if you end up down that road. I feel like I'm going in a lot of different directions, but you are not required to take it necessarily in the same sequence as everyone else. You have 21 years to complete your Regents diploma. So if it means that you have 2 years of living environment before you take that Regents exam, then so be it. And if you need to take it 3 more times, if that's what the route that you wanted to go, that's okay too. There was another thing that I wanted to mention. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, the question was, is it required that a student working on the CDOS sit for the Regents if they're not ready?
So yes, it is required that all students either are aiming for a Regents diploma or aiming for a SACC. So yes, technically your students are required to sit for Regents exams. Some people feel that that's not necessarily feasible for their students. It's really important that you look at the criteria for who is eligible for a SACC, because I think that if your student is aiming for a Regents and their accommodations and modifications are still not allowing that information, that content to be accessible to them, then maybe they meet the requirement for needing that specialized education, and a SACC is more appropriate. Again, please keep in mind that they are not expected to meet the 12-year mark and then be, the 12 years of education and then get their Regents diploma. The people that are aiming for a Regents or local diploma have until they are 21 with all of their modifications and accommodations to do so. Their safety nets, their low pass, and superintendent's determination. So there are lots of things in place that make it so that it's more accessible.
Thank you.
Sure. So towards the end of a student's career, it's important that your transition coordinator or their teacher or whoever in their district connects them with supports start to do that. And I will actually talk a little bit about some supports that can be connected even before toward the end of the school. Access VR often says, please don't connect us until students are in their junior year or 2 years before they're leaving. but Access VR is actually required to work with your students before then. So if you get that message, please be aware that WIOA has said that there are youth services Access VR is supposed to be able to provide starting at age 14. So that being said, I'm going to step back for 1 second. And I know this isn't necessarily about graduation, but it is certainly about preparing for graduation. Youth pre-employment transition services are available to students with disabilities at the age of 14. You do not have to go through Access VR to do that. There are agencies that actually will provide those specifically if you are not connected with Access VR. In my area, the Capital District Capital District Center for Independence provides pre-employment transition services to students who are 14 and up, and they will even come into your school to do that. So if you fill out an application through the CDCI, they can connect with you at home, they can connect with you virtually, they can connect with you in person. You really can individualize what a student needs, whether it's soft skills, whether it's just learning about advocating for themselves at this point, identifying whether or not they want to be identified as a person with a disability, learning what that means if you identify as a person with a disability and in your adulthood. Might mean things like just engaging in social skills groups, problem solving, building resumes, mock interviews, all kinds of just career awareness activities where they bring in people from around the community to do in-person or virtual informational interviews. So you can, I've had everyone from a COVID-19 intensive care unit nurse come virtually to give us a little informational interview to a tattoo artist. So I just ask students, who do they want to hear from? And the CDCI will help connect your students with those people. They're fantastic to work with. And outside of our area, if you look to see who provides pre-employment transition services in your area, I'm sure that you will be able to access those types of supports as well. Access VR, you can contact Access VR to ask them who provides pre-ETS services in your area, and Access VR can provide those pre-ETS services, but they're not the only avenue to do so. And pre-ETS is pre-employment transition services. So Access VR used to be called VESED way long time ago, and I have so many people who still call it VESED. So if you know what VESED is, you know what Access VR is. It is about vocational rehabilitation. So vocation, it's all about what you want to do, what your career goal is. They will support you if your career goal is to be a stock person at the Hannaford warehouse. They will support you if your career goal is to be a doctor. So obviously supports for those two positions would look very different. They might support an individual in connecting with employers, in preparing for interviews, in creating their resume. They might support an individual once they have a job with some job coaches. And John can talk about how, or I can, how you might start with Access VR job coaches, but if it looks like you need more, then OPWDD might step in to provide more of a long-term job coach. Access VR, I wish more businesses knew about Access VR because there are so many benefits to businesses to hire individuals with disabilities. Access VR even will pay the wages of an individual for an agreed upon period of time, and it's up to something like 480 hours. It's a lot. So it's considered a trial run. So there's no cost to a business if they're willing, if that individual qualifies for that trial period. There's no cost to a business to hire that person. They just have to give them a shot. And I think that information isn't out there enough. So please spread that word. So again, there's the other thing that Access VR will do in addition to employment supports directly out of high school is provide training supports, whether that be through returning to VOTEC as an adult student. So maybe we have a student who was able to complete 1 year of VOTEC, but because of maybe they didn't meet their credit requirement and had to stay back for that second year in order to pass English, let's say. They can then return to VOTEC as an adult student. A lot of Access VR supports are financially based, meaning you have to meet a criteria in order to be eligible for some of their supports, but many of them are not. Technically speaking, getting some tuition paid for a trade school is considered a financially based support, but because it falls under $10,000, Access VR covers most of those costs regardless of whether you meet eligibility requirements. So you can make more than the cap and still get some financial supports in certain circumstances. In addition to training supports, they provide college supports. This, if you meet financial eligibility, might mean tuition. It can mean covering some of those fees. It can mean covering gas money to get back and forth if you are commuting. They have a new program, which I just absolutely love, which is a coaching program for individuals with disabilities that are going into colleges. Don't quote me on this, but I don't think that that's necessarily, not all of it at least.
Can we fix the sound again, please?
Sorry, really do need to be on top of this thing. Not necessarily financially based. So you can get note taking, for instance, without meeting even if you exceed their financial cap in college. But when I say that you can get coaching in college, this kind of is like a resource room. You know, you have somebody that's going to work on your goals with you, but also check in. How are you doing? Do you have, where are you in your completion of your work? Have you touched base with this professor? Do you have your accommodations set up at college? Things like that. And that's that could be a whole other training. But those are the supports that Access would provide. In addition to Access, there's SPOA, and that's the single point of access for individuals with mental health issues. And that.
Hey, Molly,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just like try tapping your computer or something because it cuts in and out. That's the problem.
I'm going to let John take over and maybe I'll troubleshoot while that's happening.
Okay.
So I think that, Molly, when you said a whole nother training, I think all of these things on here could be a whole nother training. So it goes back to that education piece that we were talking about for families and advocates about really knowing what's out there, because as state ed changes and, requirements for graduation change, as do some of the supports and services on this page. And really what I enjoy doing is trying to dovetail some of these supports and services outside of school with people in school to help with that transition. So much like with Access VR, ETP, Employment Training Program through OPW, they will it's for somebody that might need a little bit more support. But that program, you could actually start 2 years prior to graduation. And like Access VR, they will pay the salary for the student. So it costs nothing for for Hannaford to have them come and work there and stock the shelves. And then the idea is that through the CDOS learning standards, getting the skills necessary, accessing whatever pathway to graduation they're also getting that on-the-job experience so that when that student is exiting, they have a trained employee and they're able to switch over. ETP also will follow students after graduation, time limited. So let's say they're at Hannaford for 2 years and it doesn't work out. There's no openings at that position. ETP will then help that student maybe apply to other Hannafords or maybe ShopRite or a comparable job that those skills could, be translated over to them. Supportive employment is, for those that already have a job, but they might need a little bit of different help. Maybe they're just on a different shift. Maybe the location changed, maybe the responsibilities changed. And it's kind of that job training, like these are the expectations. This is what you need to do. And then as we go down the list, these are not, so they're not as, focused on work in the traditional sense. So without walls, you're not getting paid for the work that you're doing. It's more volunteer work. But the goal is still being a valuable member of your community. And all services through OPWDD should be seen as a spectrum. So wherever your student is or your loved one after they graduate, perhaps they need a certain level of support, but then the goal is hopefully they will continue to grow and move throughout these services. Day habs are more centrally based. It's more, they go to one central location and then they might go out for an activity, or one volunteer space where a Without Walls program is out in the community all day. If an individual doesn't, need that level of support, community hab is more of a one-on-one, and that you get a community hab plan. And what that is how can I, be the biggest productive member of my community? And it has that individualized support. Services through OPW, not all of them do you have to wait until you graduate from school. So if you might be interested in OPW, I strongly urge you to go out and seek some training or some information about OPW services, because there are services that could be utilized by students are in school, during the transition process, and for post-secondary success. And before hopefully Molly got her microphone working, I do want to say, if you are in these different silos, unfortunately, so state ed, OPW, Access VR, make sure that there's crossover of documentation, so that needs that are identified on your IEP are also needs that are identified on your ComHab plan, that we're putting all of these supports and services towards a common goal, because that's where we see the most success for our students with higher levels of support, that will require higher levels of support, is if we're working on it on a more holistic approach. So that's just a little piece of information I like to point out also. How'd you make out, Molly?
How's that? Any better?
No.
No. No. Well, I will add, I don't want to talk too much if I'm breaking up a lot.
It's not that you're breaking up, Molly. It's just that you kind of go low and then you go loud. You go low, so we could hear you. It's just the volume. Yeah.
I wonder why it's changing. Anyway, it is a process, everybody. So it is not an overnight success. When you put in your application, it's not like, bam, now I get to do all of these things. It is an excruciating process in some ways. So if you have students that you think are eligible and they're in elementary school, start then. Because it really is, as long as they're using at least one service a year, they will have that service for life, or they will have eligibility for life as long as they are using at least one service per year, with one exception, and that's if you apply before the age of 8, you may need to reapply it. It's depending. You have to kind of justify that it wasn't just due to being a child, so to speak. Any questions on that? Any questions on any of these continued supports?
I've got two questions in the chat. One of them is, do you suggest that we try to connect with Access VR prior to the age of 21 to obtain supported employment, so that once they age out, they can have the opportunity for meaningful employment? Molly, you're muted. Before your volume did come back at the end, so it might be working.
Okay. How's that?
No, but
all right. So I would encourage you to connect with Access VR. They can provide supports for summer employment or after school employment. There's also WIOA, and WIOA is, kind of oversees some of the laws that have to do with Access VR, but other places aside from Access VR provide WIOA supports. And for instance, Schenectady County has a summer youth employment program. Albany County has a summer youth employment program. Those are also eligible. Students are also eligible for those prior to graduation. Those are great supports, and I've had a lot of students get hired by places outside of that program after completing the summer youth program. So those are some options as well. You can always, I believe that my email was on one of the earlier slides. So feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions specific to your individual student. But there are a vast array of supports. And I recently connected with my job training. It's actually called Schenectady County Connects for those of you in my area, but every county has sort of a one-stop It's where you can get job supports. They often are providing a lot of webinars now, but they also will come into your school and provide trainings on things like soft skills, on mock interviews. They have some sort of really cool interactive mock interview so that you're not just practicing an interview with a teacher that you've had for the last 4 years, but with a brand new person, or even on a computer that provides you with feedback and you can respond that way. They have trainings that have to do with what your social media accounts mean for employment. And we know how much that can be a navigational nightmare for some of our individuals with disabilities. So those are really great. And they're amazing people that I've had a lot of interactions with. And they come in once a month for our district. But every county has a similar program. So look into that as well.
And also, to jump off that, the original question was, do you suggest reaching out early? It's better to reach out early and say, no, you have to wait a year, than reaching out late and saying you missed the deadline. So some of these supports, they are time sensitive. So it's always better to know what's out there. For example, the ETP, 2 years prior to graduation, we've had some families interested, 6 months before they graduate, and they missed the cutoff. So it's always better to know what's out there and be early for it than late. Was there another question in the chat?
Yeah, there's one more. It says,
One more time.
has, oh, you can go, Molly.
The same deadline hold true for Access VR. If you are looking for college supports, almost everything, the initial process needs to be completed by April. And then there is a whole other set of paperwork and things that need to be input into them before July 1st. So, as much as we're still only in December, April will be here before you know it. So if you have a student that might be eligible for some supports through college programs through Access VR, I would jump on that now.
Thank you for that. The other question was, has COVID changed the age out of 21 for FAPE?
You want me to take this one, Molly? So there was a direction from the governor saying that if you were impacted because of COVID, that you would be eligible for another year. However, it was not mandated. Districts needed to agree with that. And I will tell you that even private schools struggled with supporting that because there were other students that were coming up. There was staffing concerns, there were spacing concerns. We also see that the COVID has drastically impacted OPW services and places where a lot of our students have been going. Again, it's not an entitlement, it's an eligibility. So they're just telling some students that they just need to wait at home until vacancies open up. And so the past 3 years have been, or 2.5 years have been very difficult, and they're going to have lasting effects. I am not, and Molly, correct me if I'm wrong, I am not aware of any additional FAPE directives this year. So I think that is, I think that is coming to an end. But I haven't heard much success with those directives in the past 2 years.
Correct. So 21 is the cap at this time, which is why we highly encourage you to tap into every support that you can get, and tap into every support. If you think your child is OPWDD eligible, or it would be OPWDD eligible, try. If they deny you and your team thinks that your student should be OPWDD eligible, then you can go back and appeal to them and provide additional evidence. You can do that. I've certainly had people denied initially who are then approved later. In addition to OPWDD, don't think Access VR is not for your student because maybe they look more like, that people will say, oh, they're more of an OPWDD student than an Access VR student. No, go to both. Tap every resource you can. And I know I kind of skipped over SPOA in trying to fix my audio, but SPOA is the single point of access. Each county has a SPOA, has a, a mental health program where you complete your SPOA application and submit it. You can also get supported employment through there. You can get residential supports through there, and care management, connection to your medical appointments and things like that through SPOA if there's a mental health diagnosis. So if you have a dually diagnosed individual, there are lots of supports that you can connect them with. I will be brutally honest and say that oftentimes when an agency learns that you're multiply connected, they will try to play the pass the buck game. I'm not pulling any punches. They will, but they are required by law to provide those supports regardless of who else you're connected with. So it's okay to tap away and you get what you can get, because as John said, staffing for those programs is a huge problem right now, and therefore many of them are not open or at capacity, so they're not taking new people. Or you may have to piecemeal what a week looks like for a student, so they might get 2 days in one place and 1 day in another place and 2 more days someplace else. So it's okay to do that and go through multiple agencies in order to do that. I also realized I skipped over New York State's 55B program. For anybody who isn't aware of what that is, New York State has a program for hiring individuals with disabilities. You do have to meet the minimum requirements for a job posting, but if it is a job through New York State that is an entry-level position, you meet the eligibility for their minimum requirements for that job. You can complete an application for the 55B program, and when you apply for the job, you send in your eligibility letter for New York State 55B program with your application, and you're kind of bumped up to the top of the list. So unless you're going against other people with 55B, you kind of have one leg up on everyone else. So that's something to look at. Again, there are agencies and supports that we could go on forever about and list. Jan is where you can get job accommodations. It's the Job Accommodation Network. So if there were accommodations that needed to be put in place for somebody who's going to be gainfully employed, that's another program that you can look into. Tap all of the resources that you can, because they are hurting as well. Any other questions?
We've got a couple. It says, so this attendee, I'm not sure if this is, might not be something in New York, it might just be something in California. It says, do you have any information on CASE, C-A-S-E?
I don't know what CASE is, John.
Okay, it must be a California thing.
Is it case or the cast?
I'm not sure. C-A-S-E.
No.
That's all right. Otherwise, we look good.
I want to go back to our Jamboard since we have that. I'm going to try to move my toolbars all around and get to that.
And Molly, I just want to point out the next slide has a couple of links for some information that we kind of referenced throughout the presentation. This is by no means an all-inclusive list of resources, but this is really where we got a lot of the information for this, and there's links and other resources attached to those as well. So it's a great way to kind of see what's out there and reinforce what was talked about today.
And as I said, New York State has done a really nice job recently of providing family resources. And if you go to the family resources page, which is down here, each one of these is a link. If you go to the family resources page, you not only can get download specific brochures that talk about grad requirements, but it also has one, then this is just basic grad requirements, which include your credits that are required, or I'll click on it, credits that are required, your exams that are required, your pathways. So you can see you need 4 English, 4 social studies, 3 science, 3 math, 1 language other than English. I will tell you this, if you're an individual with a disability and you are exempt from having to take language other than English, please be cognizant if you are also an athlete, because you may not be eligible for certain programs. I believe that there are some of the colleges that take some of your really elite athletes, require them to have a language other than English. So you may consider waiving that, despite the fact that you might be exempt on an IEP. That doesn't mean that you're exempt from a college. Colleges and what you are entitled to in high school are very different. I was recently talking to someone who goes, my daughter's a freshman in college, and I was recently talking to someone who said, what do I do about my daughter's 504 plan? And I said, there's no such thing as a 504 plan, unfortunately, at college. Colleges do a beautiful job, for the most part, of providing accommodations, specifically testing accommodations for students. And in addition, there are lots of supports built in for all students, like writing labs and math labs and things like that. But the things that you are entitled to at high school, you are no longer entitled to when you go to college. You can ask for them, and oftentimes will get them, but you're not entitled. There are lots of other things that kind of Access VR will provide supports for if you are college bound, and that might even include assistive technology. We are fascinated by the live scribe that records lectures as you take notes, and then you can just tap anywhere in your notes to hear that part of the lecture again. It's kind of awesome. We don't use those in the high school setting because we can't record individuals under the age of 18 without their permission, but it's a really cool tool that you could potentially get at the college level. So there again there is no end of supports that to explore when you leave and determine whether or not they would fit for you. Access VR would potentially provide an assistive tech evaluation for individuals, whether that be for needs on the job or for needs at a training school or at college. So those are things to look into as well. But I digress. This is the brochure for your requirements for graduation diploma credits. It also gives some more information about the different pathways, and gives a bit more of a description for what each pathway looks like, and tells a bit about local diploma regions. And here is where you can find more information about regions with advanced designation, and doesn't have honors on here, but the website that this links to does have a section on getting regions with honors. In addition to the graduation requirements as far as the courses that you will take, it also has a whole flyer on, this one is about COVID, we'll get there. Oh, sugar, look what I just did. It has a brochure on the safety nets and appeals and compensatory options, superintendent's determination, and all of that is on their website. In addition to these, there are videos. You can kind of watch their version of this training, and it breaks it down under each exiting credential as well, so that's great. This will explain the appeals process, which I sometimes feel like I need a giant flow chart to understand. If I use this, then I can use this, and so on, which is the best way to work those numbers if you are going for a local diploma. And this is really nice about what you can do with those Regents exemptions, because I think it's really difficult to understand, okay, I don't have to take that exam and it can count for X, Y, and Z. So those are there at the end of that, at the end of the slides under this resource page. Again, there's this who's eligible for a SACC. This is really interesting. Do you guys use this, John, the SACC decision-making flowchart? Or do students typically come to you already having that decided?
They come to us already decided. But that was a great flow chart. I looked at that.
Isn't it great? Yeah. So, um, really, it's about answering a series of yes/no questions. And this is again when somebody asks, do you have to sit for Regents exams if you're getting a CDOS? Well, CDOS, since a CDOS is not a pathway in and of itself, yes, you do. If that seems completely out of the realm of reality, then it's worth taking a look at this flow chart to say, okay, can I answer yes to all of these? And does that mean that my student is then eligible for a SACC instead of the Regents diploma? So it looks like it starts with, is my student identified as a disability? Do they have a severe cognitive disability? So there's a criteria for that as well. And then do they meet the following? So a severe cognitive disability and requires a specialized education program and requires education supports like assistive tech or personal care or medical services or behavioral interventions. This third piece is huge because I think a lot of our students have significant cognitive disabilities and need some specialized educational programming, but it's that third and. Do they also need assistive technology? Do they also need personal care services, health or medical services, or behavioral interventions that can kind of parse out who is eligible and who isn't? And then it says they are eligible and says what the IEP must state and what parents must know about that. So that's really nice to look at as well. Under here, there's also more information about multiple pathways, safety net options, and so on. New York State has a grad requirement presentation. We could have just shown you the one that they created. I didn't think it was as comprehensive. It sort of leaned one way, in my opinion, but it is there. So you can get, it tends to lean more towards if what you need for those 22 credits and so on. Any questions about the resources?
We have no questions in the chat.
All right, so I would like to just ask, where is Weebatuck? I love to see all the people from all over, and welcome everybody. There's more than one of you from Weebatuck. Am I even saying it correctly? Feel free to jump in, Weebatuck. But we have chair people, we have parents, school counselors, and so on. It looks like people were kind of all over the board about whether they were comfortable, kind of in the middle. We had a lot of people who were super comfortable, so I hope if they have anything to share, they'll pop in. And I love that the Regents diploma is near and dear to people's hearts. I would love to, I'm gonna start a little controversy, I suppose. How many people feel like the two pathways are that there needs to be something more than those two pathways? If we talk about a Regents diploma being a pathway and the SACC being the other pathway, yes, there are, if you don't quite succeed, here you might get this and here you might get this, but what does that say if we go back to that idea of transition theory? What does that say to those students? Your pathway was the Regents exam, but you didn't quite make it, so you get a local diploma, but you didn't quite make that, so you get the CDOS. I think that we are really undervaluing what their educational outcomes are, and I'd love to know what others think. Is anyone feeling brave?
So this is Anne Marie Clark, but I agree. And the difference between a local diploma and then the NISA is huge. And not all of our students should be getting the NISA because they don't fit that criteria, but yet they can't. I'm the one who asked the question about the Regents. They can't sit, putting them in front of a Regents exam, just doesn't seem appropriate. So there's a big gap there between, I think, local diploma and the NISA diploma. And if CDOS, I know you're supposed to be working towards your local diploma and the, what am I trying to say? We are expecting more from these students than academically than we would from the NISA students. And it's appropriate to do that. But some of those kids aren't there yet where they are able to do grade level work or sit for a Regent. So I do think there's a huge gap there.
I agree. And if you're not aware, right now there is a graduation measures committee looking at what the options really should be for New York State. And they just started some regional meetings where you can join their regional meetings and voice your opinions. They're going to collect information from the community at large. Everyone is welcome. And they are hopefully going to look back at public comments and make some decisions about what your graduation pathways and outcomes should really look like, and if they really are representative of all students and allowing all students a valuable option. And a means of exiting high school with something that is meaningful. That question about, is a CDOS meaningful to employers? Sometimes, but it should, every employer should know what a CDOS is if we're really going to hang our hat on that. So I encourage you to look for the graduation measures. I'll see if I can find it, the graduation measures link, and join some of those regional meetings and share your thoughts on what exiting credentials should be. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can find that link and put it in the chat.
Thank you.
While you're looking for that link, I'll add another question that was in the chat. It was, do you all have any tips to help prepare students for the Regents tests? Are there samples out there?
Sorry, that's me. John's not preparing people for Regents. There are many sample Regents exams, and a really, a good program would have students learning the content, but also learning what a Regents looks like. You can look at a rubric, which is the way that a Regents is scored online, and see what exactly the criteria for each section is and how to gain the most points. And I will be honest, there are times that in order to get through a Regents exam, which is just one of the criteria to get a diploma, you have to teach them how best to pass that test. So if I have a student who really struggles with applying background knowledge, for instance, I have somebody that comes to mind right away. He can restate a question. He can answer that question using evidence directly from a text. So he can find relevant evidence and answer the question with that. But if he tries to apply background knowledge, it is, no matter what we do, out of left field most of the time. So I'm more inclined to tell him to not add that piece. He's more likely to have the points taken off for being completely wrong than he is if he had not added that at all. So sometimes it's really about learning the strategies to pass the exam and learning the best way to get the most points. And that's okay. It's okay to learn those skills too. It's okay to know that this is a strategy for test taking. This is where my strengths are in this test, and this is where I'm going to struggle. So I think that those are things that if the student receives resource, or if you have lots of districts provide some Regents support as you get closer to the exams, I would talk to their teachers, their special education teachers, about what are strategies specific to my student, where are their strengths going to help them in the Regents, in what areas might they say, I'm not even going to put something down for that. Does that make sense? I hope so.
I think that was great. And I think to round it out, we have one last question. It says, I'd like to know what a transition plan looks like. Is it a formal document attached as an amendment to the IEP or written as IEP goals?
It's part of the IEP. It's once the student is 15, it opens up different sections of the IEP, and all of those different sections are part of the planning. I know that our transition planning might look a little different than traditional public schools with some of the assessments that we have. We find it increasingly difficult to find standardized assessments for our students. But so different districts might use different assessing tools. They might, it might be represented a little differently on the IEP, but it is part of the IEP, coordinated set of activities, post-secondary. post-measurable secondary goals. These are all different sections that open up once that transition section is opened in your student's IEP.
Awesome. And that is the last question that we have in the chat.
And Molly, Weebatuck, I Googled it and it's about an hour and a half south of us here in the capital region, down sort of near Kingston.
Interesting. Is it in Ulster County?
I don't know.
I can speak to that. I'm Tammy Nethercott. We're in Dutchess County.
Ah,
We're sort of a tri-state location. We're in very northeast Dutchess County that borders against Sharon, Connecticut, and also Massachusetts, like Egremont, Massachusetts.
Oh, it's beautiful there. Very nice. Thank you for coming. I did just put in the chat the link to upcoming regional meetings for graduation measures. So I encourage you to voice your concerns if you have them about our options for our students. The links are right there and many of them are coming right up. Some of them have passed, and they are broken into region, but I don't think that much matters. Just get your voice out there, join the ones that you can, and email the people on the committee if you have thoughts about these being our pathways and what they really mean to our students when they exit, and what they mean to employers or to agencies and things like that. Because I think it is imperative that we find things that have value for everybody.